Before we go ahead and get started with this tutorial, I just wanted to quickly talk about the different materials that I'll be using. For the yarn, I will be double stranding with a chunky number 5 weight fiber, along with a lace weight number 0 mohair. So as you can see, I'm always gonna have these 2 strands on my hook. And for those who are interested, this is actually my own hand-dyed fiber. So again, I have my chunky number 5, along with my mohair lace weight fiber. I'll also be using a 6.5mm crochet hook along with the yarn, as well as some scissors, a darning needle, and I would highly recommend using a measuring tape just to make sure that you get the correct fitting beanie for your size. So now that we have the basic materials, let's go ahead and jump into the tutorial. Our starting chain is going to determine the height of our beanie. So what I've chosen to do is measure from the very top of my head and then just kind of determine how long I want the beanie to be. So for my example, I'm going to measure again from the top of my head down to about my eyebrows, and then I'm going to add on about an extra inch to 1.5 inches for the brim. So for my example, I'm going to aim for a length of about 8 inches long. And again, this is just going to determine the total height of the beanie. So what I'm going to do is grab my 2 strands of yarn, and I'm going to create a very basic slip knot. I'm going to loop this over my finger and pull up. And now that I have that slip knot, I can insert my 6.5 and pull tight. And from here, go ahead and create that starting chain that's going to reach your initial measurement. So now that I have that slip knot, I'm just going to yarn over and pull through, yarn over, pull through. So here's my starting chain. I decided to go with a total of 23 chains to reach my 8 inches long. And for this pattern, I'll also be working with a tapered effect at the very top of the beanie. So just take a quick moment to kind of determine how much of a tapering you want. For my example, I'm going to aim for about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 chains, which is about 2¼ inches. And again, this tapering is only going to be at the very top portion of the beanie. So in order to create the tapering effect, I will always work slip stitches into these 7 stitches, and for the remainder of the stitches I'll just be working with half double crochets. So now that we have kind of like the basis of our beanie, let's go ahead and jump into row 1. And for the start of the row, what I'm going to do is work with half double crochets. So I'm going to skip this first initial chain in my row and insert my hook into the second chain. I'm going to yarn over, turn my work over, and grab the back bump. And again, this is my second chain from the start of the row. So once I've inserted, I'm going to pull up a loop, and with 3 on my hook, yarn over and pull through all 3. And that is your first half double crochet. From here, yarn over and look for the next available stitch. I'm just going to insert and pull up a loop, and with 3 on, yarn over and pull through all 3. And again, yarn over, look for the next available stitch, insert and pull up a loop, yarn over and pull through all 3. And I'm just going to repeat this process until I have 7 chains remaining. I've just got done working up my first 15 half double crochets, and at this point I have 7 chains remaining. So what I'm going to do is work with slip stitches into the last remaining 7 stitches, or again however many that you have left for your own size. So what I'm going to do is find my next available stitch. I'm just going to insert, pull up a loop, and pull through. And again, looking for that next stitch, which is right here. Insert, pull up a loop, and then pull that loop through. And just repeat your slip stitches until the very end of your row. And 7. So this is the end of row 1 for my beanie. Now for rows 2, we're going to repeat the same process but in reverse. So I'm going to start by working my first 7 slip stitches, and then I'll finish out the row with my 15 half double crochet. For rows 3, I'm going to repeat row 1. So we're just going to start off with the 15 half double crochet and then finish the row with the 7 slip stitches. So I'm always going to be repeating and then reversing this process. Let's go ahead and show you guys row 2. I'm going to start by chaining 1 first and then turning my work. And no matter what row you're on, you always want to start your row with a chain 1. So now for my first 7 stitches, again, I'm going to work with my slip stitches, but I only want to work into the front loop instead of working into both 2 top loops. So looking here at my very first stitch, I'm going to pick up only that front loop on my hook. So there I have it. I can yarn over, pull up a loop, and pull through, and that's my first slip stitch. And here for my next stitch, again, only picking up the front loop. So we're not picking up both 2 top loops, only the front. I'm going to pull up a loop and then pull through. That is my second slip stitch. I'll repeat this 5 more times. Here's 3. This is my 4th slip stitch, my 5th, my 6th, and now here for my 7th slip stitch. And now at this point, I should have 15 stitches remaining in my row. So I'm going to switch back to my half double crochets. So following my very last slip stitch, I'm going to yarn over and look for the next available stitch. Pick up the front loop only and pull up a loop, and with 3 on, yarn over and pull through all 3. So there is my first half double crochet, and again, you always want to make sure that it's aligning, so I have a half double on top of a half double. Looking here for my next stitch, I'm going to yarn over and pick up the front loop only and pull up a loop, and with 3 on, yarn over and pull through all 3. And just repeat your half double crochets through the front loop only until the very end of your row. I have 2 more stitches until row 2 is complete. So I'm just going to go ahead and work that next stitch. And now here for that very last and final stitch in the row, I'm going to work through both 2 top loops. Because this is the edge where we're going to have the brim of the hat, I do want to make sure that the edge of my work is nice and even. So again, I am picking up both 2 top loops on that last and final stitch, and this is what your row 2 should look like. For rows 3, I'm going to be repeating row 1. So I'm going to start with my first 15 half double crochet, and then I'm going to end with my 7 slip stitches. So for row 3 and every single row after, chain 1 first and turn your work. And now I can go ahead and start off with my half double crochets. So I'm going to yarn over and look for that very first stitch, pick up the front loop only and work a half double crochet. Yarn over, pick up the front loop only, and half double crochet. And I'll repeat this until I reach my 7 slip stitches, which is my tapered section. And now that I have my 7 stitches remaining, I can go ahead and finish out with slip stitches. So I'm just going to pick up that front loop and slip stitch, front loop, and slip stitch. And here for that very last stitch in the row, you can either pick up both 2 top loops or you can just stick with the front loop only. Because this is the very top of the beanie, so the tapered edge, this is going to be completely sewn shut. So you're not really going to see any gaps or any errors. So I'm just going to pick up the front loop only and finish out with a slip stitch. So this is the end of row 3. But again, keep in mind that you always want to stick with that front loop only, and over time you are going to notice this very slight ribbing effect. So I feel like that adds a little bit extra texture to your beanie. And at this point, I can just continue to add on as many more rows as necessary, and then I'll come back on camera to show you guys what my work is looking like. So I've just finished up a good majority of this beanie, and as you can see, this is kind of the general shape that your beanie should be taking. Again, we have these short slip stitch rows right here, and then we have the basic half double crochet rows right here. So all in all, I did make sure to leave off on an even numbered row. I just finished up row 36, and that is where I'm going to leave off. And for those of you who want a quick little measurement on how wide my 36 rows are, it's a little bit tricky, so I'm kind of just gonna bend the measuring tape and get an estimate for sizing. But for my 36 rows, I get roughly 18 inches across the widest portion of the beanie. And now at this point, we can go ahead and move on to seaming the beanie together. So what I'm going to be doing is taking both open edges of the beanie and aligning them just like this. And what we're going to do is slip stitch our work together all the way up these two seams. And once we have that finished, we're also going to use our darning needle to kind of sew together this open edge and really cinch it in and close up the beanie. So let's go ahead and move on to seaming the open edge. So picking up here at the very end of my 36th row, I am going to chain one and turn my work so that I can align my very last row of stitches with the very first row. So to begin seaming, I'm going to start here with the very first stitch in the row. For the first stitch, I'm going to pick up both two top loops on the front panel and both two top loops here on the other edge. So just make sure that you have all four loops attached, so that there's not too much of a gap here where we're joining the beanie. So again, I'm just gonna slip stitch and bring that work all the way through. And now at this point, what I'm gonna do is pick up the front loop only on the panel facing us. And on the back side, I'm gonna pick up the back loop only. So we're kind of creating like a little bit of a sandwich. And now that I have the front loop and the back loop on, I can yarn over and slip stitch that work together. And again, looking here at this next stitch, I'm going to pick up the front loop on the panel facing me. And then on the back panel, I'll pick up the back loop. So this is kind of considered like the outermost loops. And again, I'm going to yarn over and slip stitch that work closed. And again, picking up the front loop on the front panel and the back loop on the back panel. And slip stitch, front loop and back loop and slip stitch. And as you continue to slip stitch your pieces together, this is what that seam should look like. And I'm just going to continue to work those slip stitches all the way up, even through this tapered section. So once you finish seaming all the way up this open edge, I'm just going to leave a super long tail. And I'm going to cut my yarn all the way over here because I want to use this tail to help us stitch together this open edge. So picking up here after that very last slip stitch, I'm just going to yarn over and pull the yarn all the way through so that I can kind of tie off a knot right here at the top of the beanie. So take your long tail and weave it through the edge of your darning needle. And now at this point, we can use our darning needle to kind of bob and weave in and out this very top edge of the beanie. So what I'm going to do is simply just go in, find any spot that you can, and then I can pull the yarn through. And then now I want to come back out the front. So I'm kind of going to stretch my work apart and look for any little gap or spot that I can find where my needle is very easily going to poke back out the front. So I kind of want to create like an S, kind of think of this like a snake. We just came out the front, so now I want to go through the back and then bring the yarn back. And now I'm going to move over a couple more rows and poke out the front. So if you kind of look at this from like a top-down view, what I'm going to do is poke my needle through the back and then back through the front, poke to the back, and then to the front again. And that's simply all that I'm doing along this top edge. And I'm just going to repeat this until I get all the way back around to the start of my row. And now that I've made it all the way back around to the start of the row, what I can do at this point is pull on this tail and tighten up that top part of the beanie. So just kind of take your time, tug on it gently, but you want to make sure that you're shifting your yarn around so that it gets nice and tight and kind of cinches up here at the very center of the beanie. So as you can see, I still have a little bit of a hole, but again, I'm just going to gently tug on this and tighten up that center as much as possible. And now that it's as tight as I can physically make it, I'm going to use the other tail end and then simply tie a knot. I'll actually tie 2 or 3 of these just to make sure that it's as secure as possible. So I was actually able to get the center of my beanie rather tight, but if you still have a very tiny hole or like a little bit of a gap, the very last thing that you can do is simply use your darning needle and kind of pierce through the top edge just like this as to like physically sew it up. So I'm just going to bring that yarn through. And again, I'm just kind of going across the center of the beanie. So now that I've gone that way, I can kind of pinch my beanie this way and just physically pick up kind of like 2 edges of the beanie around that center and then pull the yarn through. So we're essentially just sewing together that open edge or that open hole. And then once you've kind of gone through it a few more times, you can use that tail end again and tie off one last knot. Now this very last step is going to be completely optional. You guys don't have to do it. You can leave your beanie as is, but I will have to say that I did make my beanie just a little bit too short. So my last and final like little tip that I'm going to do is reattach my yarn to the edge of this beanie, and I'm just going to place single crochets in the round. So really quickly here, I'm just going to reattach my yarn very close to where I seamed up the beanie. So anywhere that I can kind of wiggle my hook through, I'm going to attach my yarn right here. So I have my yarn reattached to my beanie, and I'm just going to pull up a loop and chain 1. And from here, I'm just going to place single crochets across the edge of this beanie. So wherever I feel I can wiggle my hook through and place a single crochet, and again, another single crochet. A safe rule of thumb is to place 1 single crochet for each half double crochet row. So really just kind of taking my time here and stopping every few seconds to assess that I like the stitches and how it's looking. So I'm just going to continue to work these across the edge of the beanie. So I just finished up the first row of these single crochets along the brim, and I'm just going to slip stitch into that chain 1 that we created. And because I think I want at least 1 more row, I'm just going to chain 1 and turn my work. And of course, at this point, you've guessed it, I'm going to place 1 single crochet into the top of every single stitch. So I'm essentially just working back along this open edge of the beanie and adding an extra row of single crochet. And of course, once you've added on as many rows as you'd like, make sure that you slip stitch into your chain 1 from the start of the row. Also cut off your yarn and weave in your ends. And honestly, that's all that there is to this beanie. It's so simple, but I kind of like this little technique in the event that you made your beanie a little bit too short like I did. Once she's done, we'll give her a good old try on.